Shalom, welcome back. We are now up to Book 6 on the Sermons of Peter. It says, "On the third day, when I came with my friends to the appointed place in Tyre, I found Appion sitting between a Nubian and Athenodorus and waiting for us, along with many other learned men. But in no wise dismayed, I greeted them and sat down opposite Appion, and in a little while he began to speak. I wish to start from the following point, and to come with all speed at once to the question. Before you, my son Clement, joined us, my friend a Nubian here, and Athenodorus, who yesterday were among those who heard you discourse, were reporting to me what you said of the numerous false accusations I brought against the gods, when I was visiting you in Rome. At the time you were shamming love, how I charged them with pederasty, lasciviousness, and numerous incests of all kinds. But my son, you ought to have known that I was not in earnest when I wrote such things about the gods, but was concealing the truth from my love to you. That truth, however, if it so please you, you may hear from me now. The wisest of the ancients, men who had by hard labor learned all truth, kept the path of knowledge hid from those who were unworthy and had no taste for lessons in divine things. For it is not really true that from Uranus and his mother Gaia were born 12 children, as the myth counts them: 6 sons, Ochios, Chios, Krios, Hyperion, Iapethos, Kronos, and 6 daughters, Thea, Themis, Mnesime, Demeter, Thetis, and Rhea. Nor that Kronos with the knife of adamant mutilated his father Uranus, as you say, and threw the part into the sea, nor that Aphrodite sprang from the drops of blood that flowed from it, nor that Kronos associated with Rhea and devoured his first begotten son Pluto, because a certain saying of Prometheus led him to fear that a child born from him would wax stronger than himself, and spoil him of his kingdom, nor that he devoured in the same way Poseidon, his second child, nor that when Zeus was born next, his mother Rhea concealed him, and when Kronos asked for him that he might devour him, gave him a stone instead, nor that this, when it was devoured, pressed those who had been previously devoured, and forced them out, so that Pluto, who was devoured first, came out first, and after him Poseidon, and then Zeus, nor that Zeus, as the story goes, preserved by the wit of his mother, ascended into heaven and spoiled his father of the kingdom, nor that he punished his father's brothers, nor that he came down to lust after mortal women, nor that he associated with his sisters and daughters and sisters-in-law and was guilty of shameful pederasty, nor that he devoured his daughter Metis, in order that from her he might make Athena be born out of his own brain, and from his thigh might bear Dionysus, who is said to have been rent in pieces by the Titans, nor that he held a feast at the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, nor that he excluded Eris from the marriage, nor that Eris, on her part, thus dishonored, contrived an occasion of quarreling and discord among the feasters, nor that she took a golden apple from the gardens of Hesperides and wrote on it for the fair. And then they fable how Hera and Athena and Aphrodite found the apple, and quarreling about it came to Zeus, and he did not decide it for them, but sent them to Hermes, to the shepherd Paris, to be judged for their beauty. But there was no such judging of the goddesses, nor did Paris give the apple to Aphrodite, nor did Aphrodite, being thus honored, honor him in return by giving him Helen to wife, for the honor bestowed by the goddess could never have furnished a pretext for a universal war, and that the ruin of him who was honored himself nearly related to the race of Aphrodite. But my son, as I have said, such stories have a peculiar and philosophical meaning, which can be allegorically set forth in such a way that you yourself would listen with wonder. And I said, I beseech you not to torment me with the delay. And he said, do not be afraid, for I shall lose no time, but commence at once. There was once a time when nothing existed but chaos and a confused mixture of orderless elements, which were as yet simply heaped together. This nature testifies, and great men have been of opinion that it was so. Of these great men I shall bring forward to you him who excelled them all in wisdom, Homer, when he says, with a reference to the original confused mass, but may you all become water and earth, implying that from these all things had their origin, and that all things return to their first state, which is chaos, when the watery and earthly substances are separated. And Hesiod, the Theogony, says, assuredly chaos was the very first to come into being. Now, by coming into being, he evidently meant that chaos came into being as having a beginning and did not always exist without beginning. And Orpheus likens chaos to an egg, in which was the confused mixture of the primordial elements. This chaos, which Orpheus calls an egg, is taken for granted by Hesiod, having a beginning, produced from infinite matter, and originated in the following way. This matter of four kinds and endowed with life was an entire infinite abyss, so to speak, an eternal stream, born about without order, and forming every now and then countless but ineffectual combinations, which therefore it dissolved again from want of order, ripe indeed, but not able to be bound so as to generate a living creature. And once it chanced that this infinite sea, which was thus by its own nature driven about with a natural motion, flowed in an orderly manner from the same as to the same, back on itself, like a whirlpool, mixing the substances in such a way that from each there flowed down the middle of the universe, as in the funnel of a mold, precisely that which was most useful and suitable for the generation of a living creature. This was carried down by the all-carrying water whirlpool, drew itself to the surrounding spirit, and having been so conceived that it was very fertile, formed a separate substance. For just as a bubble is usually formed in water, so everything round about contributed to the conception of this ball-like globe. Then there came forth to the light, after it had been conceived in itself, and was borne upwards by the divine spirit, which surrounded it, perhaps the greatest thing ever born, a piece of workmanship, so to speak, having life in it, which has been conceived from that entire infinite abyss, in the shape like an egg, and as swift as a bird. Now you must think of Chronos as time, and Rhea as the following of the watery substance, for the whole body of the flowing of the watery substance, for the whole body of matter was born about for some time, before it brought forth like an egg the sphere-like, all-embracing heavens, which at first was full of productive marrow, so that it was able to produce out of itself elements and colors of all sorts, while from one substance and one color it produced all kinds of forms. For as a peacock's egg seems to have only one color, while potentially it has in it all the colors of the animal that is to be, so this living egg, conceived out of infinite matter, when set in motion by the underlying and ever-flowing matter, produces many different forms. For within the circumference of a certain living creature, which is both male and female, is formed by the skill of the indwelling divine spirit. This Orpheus calls Phanes, because when it appeared, the universe shone forth from it with the luster of that most glorious of the elements, fire, perfected in moisture. Nor is this incredible, since glowworm's nature gives us to see a moist light. This egg then, which was the first substance, growing somewhat hot, was broken by the living creature within, and then there took shape and came forth something, such as Orpheus also speaks of, where he says, when the capacious egg was broken, etc. And so by the mighty power of that which appeared and came forth, the globe attained coherency and maintained order, while it itself took its seat, as it were, on the summit of heaven, there in ineffable mystery, diffusing light through the endless ages. But the productive matter left inside the globe separated the substances of all things, for first its lower part, just like the dregs, sank downwards of its own weight, and this they call Pluto from its gravity and weight and great quantity of underlying matter, styling it the king of Hades and the dead. When then they say that this primordial substance, although most filthy and rough, was devoured by Kronos, that as time, this is to be understood in a physical sense as meaning that it sank downwards, and that the water which flowed together after this first sediment and floated on the surface of the first substance they call Poseidon. And this is what remained the purest and noblest of all, for it is translucent fire they call Zeus from its glowing nature. Now since fire ascends, this was not swallowed and made to descend by time or Kronos, but as I said, the fiery substance, since it has life in it and naturally ascends, flew right up into the air, which from its purity is very intelligent. By his own proper heat, then, Zeus, that is, the glowing substance, draws up what is left of the underlying moisture, to wit, that very strong and divine spirit, which they call Metis. And this, when it has reached the summit of the ether, was devoured by it, moisture being mixed with heat, so to say, and causing in it that ceaseless palpitation, it begat intelligence, which they call Pallas, from this palpitating. And this is artistic wisdom by which the ethereal artificer wrought out the whole world. And from the all-pervading Zeus, that is, from this very hot air extends all the way to our earth, and this they call Hera. Wherefore, because it has come down below in the aether, which is the purest substance, just as a woman, as regards purity, is inferior, when the two were compared to see which was the better, she was rightly regarded as the sister of Zeus in respect of her origin from the same substance, but as his spouse, as being inferior like a wife. And Hera we understand to be happy, tempering of the atmosphere, and therefore she is very fruitful. But Athena, as they call Pallas, was reckoned as a virgin, because on account of the intense heat she could produce nothing. In a similar fashion, Artemis is explained, for her they take as the lowest depth of air, and so they call her a virgin, because she could not bear anything on account of the extreme cold. And that troubled and drunken composition which arises from the upper and lower vapors they call Dionysus, as troubling the intellect. And the water under the earth, which is in nature indeed one, but which flows through all the paths of the earth and is divided into many parts, they call Osiris, as being cut in pieces. And they understand Adonis as favorable seasons, Aphrodite as coition and generation, Demeter as the earth, the girl, Persephone, as seeds, and Dionysus some understand as the vine. And I must ask you to think of all such stories as embodying some such allegory. Look at Apollo as the wandering sun, a son of Zeus, who was also called Mithras, as completing the period of the year. And these said transformations of the all-pervading Zeus must be regarded as the numerous changes of the seasons, while his numberless wives you must understand to be years or generations. For the power which proceeds from the ether and passes through the air unites with all the years and generations in turn, and continually varies them, and so produces or destroys the crops, and ripe fruits are called his children, the barrenness of some seasons being referred to as unlawful unions. When Apion was allegorizing in this way, I became plunged in thought and seemed not to be following what he was saying. So he interrupted his discourse and said to me, "If you do not follow what I'm saying, why should I speak at all?" And I answered, "Do not suppose that I do not understand what you say. I understand it thoroughly, and that the more that this is not the first time I've heard it, and that you may know that I'm not ignorant of these things, I shall epitomize what you have said and supply the order as I have heard from them from others, as the allegorical interpretations of these stories you have omitted." And Apion said, "Do so." And I answered, I shall not at the present speak particularly of that living egg which was conceived by a happy combination out of the infinite matter, and from which, when it was broken, the masculo-feminine phanes leapt forth, as some say. I say little about that up to the point when this broken globe attained coherency, there being left in it some of the marrow-like matter, and I shall briefly run over the description of what took place in it by the agency of this matter with all that followed. For from Kronos and Rhea were born, as you say, that is, by time and matter. First Pluto, who represents the sediment which settled down, and then Poseidon, the liquid substance in the middle, which floated over the heavier body below, and their third child, that is Zeus, is the ether and the highest of all. It was not devoured, but as it is a fiery power, and naturally ascends, it flew up as with a bound to the very highest ether. And the bonds of Kronos are the binding together of heaven and earth, as I have heard others allegorizing. And as mutilation is the separation and parting of the elements. For as they all were severed and separated according to their respective natures, that each kind might be arranged by itself. And time no longer begets anything, but the things which have been begotten of it by law of nature produce their successors. And the Aphrodite who emerged from the sea is the fruitful substance which arises out of moisture, with which the warm spirit mixing causes that sexual desire and perfects the beauty of the world. In the marriage banquet, at which Zeus held the feast on the occasion of the marriage of Nereid Thetis and the beautiful Peleus, has in it this allegory, that you may know, Apion, that you are not the only one from whom I've heard this sort of thing. The banquet, then, is the world, and the 12 are these high, heavenly props of the fates, called the zodiac. Prometheus is foresight, by which all things arise. Peleus is clay, namely that which collected from the earth and mixed with Nereus, or water, to produce men. And from the mixing of the two, i.e. water and earth, the first offspring was not begotten, but fashioned complete, and called Achilles, because he never put his lips to the breast. Still, in the bloom of life, he is slain by an arrow while desiring to have Polyxena, that is, something other than the truth, and foreign to it, death stealing on him through a wound in his foot. Then Hera and Athena, Aphrodite and Eris, and the apple, and Hermes, and the judgment, and the shepherd, having some such hidden meaning as the following. Hera is dignity, Athena, manliness, Aphrodite is pleasure, Hermes, language, which interprets thought, the shepherd, Paris, unreason and brutish passion. Now, if in the prime of life reason, that shepherd of the soul, is brutish, does not regard its own advantage, will not have anything to do with manliness and temperance, chooses only pleasure, and gives the prize to lust alone, bargaining that it is to receive in return from lust what may delight it. He who thus judges incorrectly will choose pleasure to his own destruction and that of his friends. And Ares is a jealous spite, and the golden apples of the Hesperides are perhaps riches, by which occasionally even temperate persons like Hera are seduced, and manly ones like Athena are made jealous, so that they do things which do not become them, and the soul's beauty, like Aphrodite, is destroyed under the guise of refinement. To speak briefly, in all men riches provoke evil discord. And Hercules, who slew the serpent, which led and guarded riches, is a true philosophical reason which, free from all wickedness, wanders over the earth, visiting the souls of men and chastising all it meets, namely, men like fierce lions, or timid stags, or savage boars, or multiform hydras. And so with all the other fabled labors of Hercules, they all have a hidden reference to moral valor. But these instances must suffice, for all our time would be insufficient if we were to go over each one. Now, since these things can clearly, profitably, and without prejudice to piety set forth in an open and straightforward manner, I wonder you call those men insensible or sensible and wise who concealed them under crooked riddles and overlaid them with filthy stories, and thus, as if impelled by an evil spirit, deceived almost all men. For either these things are not riddles, but real crimes of the gods, in which case they should not have been exposed to contempt, nor should their needs have been set forth before men at all as models, or things falsely attributed to the gods were set forth in an allegory, and then, apion, they whom you call wise erred, in that by concealing under unworthy stories things themselves worthy, they led men to sin, and that not without dishonoring those whom they believed to be gods. Wherefore do not suppose that they were wise men, but rather evil spirits who could cover honorable actions with wicked stories, in order that they who wish to imitate their betters may emulate those deeds of so-called gods, which yesterday in my discourse I spoke so freely of, namely their parricides, their murders of their children, their incest of all kinds, their shameless adulteries, and countless impurities. The most impious of them are those who wish these stories to be believed, in order that they may not be ashamed when they do the like. And if they had been disposed to act reverently, they ought, as I've said a little ago, even if the gods really did the things which are sung of them, to have veiled their indecencies under more seemly stories, and not on the contrary as you say they did. When the deeds of the gods were honorable, clothed them in wickedness and indecent forms, which, even when interpreted, can only be understood by much labor. And when they were understood by some, they indeed got for their much toil the privilege of not being deceived, which they might have had without the toil, while those who were deceived were utterly ruined. Those, however, who trace the allegories to a more honorable source I do not object to, as, for instance, those who explain one allegory by saying it was wisdom which sprang from the head of Zeus. On the whole, it seems to me more probable that the wicked men, robbing the gods of their honor, ventured to promulgate these insulting stories. Nor do we find the poetical allegory about any of the gods consistent with itself. To go no further than the fashioning of the universe, the poets now say that the nature was the first cause of the whole creation. Now that it was mind, for, say they, the first moving and mixture of the elements came from nature, but it was the foresight of mind which arranged them in order. Even when they assert that it was nature which fashioned the universe, being unable absolutely to demonstrate this on account of the traces of design in the work, they inweave the foresight of mind in such a way that they are able to entrap even the wisest. But we say to them, if the world arose from self-moved nature, how did it ever take proportion and shape which cannot come but from a superintending wisdom, and can be comprehended only by knowledge, which alone can trace such things? If, on the other hand, it is by wisdom that all things subsist and maintain order, how can it be that those things arose from self-moved chance? Then those who chose to make dishonorable allegories of divine things, as for instance the Metis who was devoured by Zeus, had fallen into a dilemma, because they did not see that they who in these stories about the gods indirectly taught physics denied the very existence of the gods, revolving all kinds of gods into mere allegorical representations of the various substances of the universe. And so it is more likely that the gods these persons celebrate were some sort of wicked magicians who were in reality wicked men, but by magic assumed different shapes, committed adulteries, and took away life. And thus, to the men of old who did not understand magic, seems to be the gods by means they did, by the things they did, and the bodies and tombs of these men are to be seen in many towns. For instance, as I mentioned already, the Caucasus Mountains, there is shown the tomb of a certain Kronos, a man and a fierce monarch who slew his children. And the son of this man, called Zeus, became worse than his father, and having, by the power of magic, been declared ruler of the universe, he committed many adulteries and inflicted punishment on his fathers and uncles, and so died. And the Cretans show his tomb, And in Mesopotamia there lie buried a certain Helios at Atir, and a certain Selene at Carhe, and a certain Hermes, a man lies buried in Egypt, Ares in Thrace, Aphrodite in Cyprus, Achilles in Epidaurus, and the tombs of many other such persons are to be seen. Thus, to right-thinking men, it is clear that they were admitted to be mortals, and their contemporaries, knowing that they were mortal when they died, paid them no more heed, and it was length of time which clothed them in the glory of gods. Nor need you to wonder that they who lived in the times of Aesculapius and Hercules were deceived, or the contemporaries of Dionysus or any other of the men of that time, when even Hector in Ilium and Achilles in the island of Lus are worshipped by the inhabitants of those places, and the Pontes worship Patroclus, and the Rhodesians Alexander of Macedon. Moreover, among the Egyptians, even to the present day, a man is worshipped as a god before his death, and this truly is a small impiety that the Egyptians give divine honors to a man in his lifetime. But what is of all things most absurd is that they worship birds and creeping things and all kinds of beasts, for the mass of men neither drink nor do anything with discretion. But look, I pray you, at what is most disgraceful of all. He who is with them, the father of gods and men, is said to them to have had intercourse with Leda, and many of them set up in public a painting of this, writing above it the name Zeus. To punish this insult, I should wish that they would paint their own present king in such base embraces as they have dared to do with Zeus, and set it up in public, and that from the anger of a temporary monarch, and him immortal, they shall learn to render honor where it is due. This I say to you, not as myself already knowing the true God, but I am happy to say that even if I do not know who is God, I think I at least clearly know what God is. And first then, the four original elements cannot be God because they have a cause. Nor can that mixing be God, nor the compounding, nor that generating, nor that globe which surrounds the visible universe, nor the dregs which flow together in Hades, nor the water which floats over them, nor the fiery substance, nor the air which extends from it to our earth. For the four elements, if they lay outside one another, could not have been mixed together so as to generate animal life without some great artificer. If they have always been united, even in this cause, they are fitted together by an artistic mind to what is requisite for the limbs and parts of animals, that they may be able to preserve their retrospective proportions, may have a clearly defined shape, and that all the inward parts may attain the fitting coherency. In the same way also the positions suitable for each are determined, and that very beautifully by the artificer's mind, to be brief in all other things which a living creature must have. This great being of the world is in no respect wanting. Thus we are shut up to the supposition that there is an unbegotten artificer who brought the elements together, that they were separate, or if they were together, artistically blended them so that to generate life, and perfected from all one work. For it cannot be that a work which is completely wise can be made without a mind which is greater than it. Nor will it do to say that love is the artificer of all things, or desire, or power, or any such thing. All these are liable to change and transient in their very nature, nor can that be God which is moved by another, much less what is altered by time and nature, and can be annihilated. While I was saying these things to Appion, Peter drew near from Caesarea in Tyre. The people were flocking together, hurrying to meet him and unite in an expression of gratification at his visit. As Appion withdrew, accompanied by a Nubian and Athenodorus only, but the rest of us hurried to meet Peter, and I was the first to greet him at the gate, and I led him toward the inn. When we arrived, we dismissed the people, and when he deigned to ask what had taken place, I concealed nothing, but told him of Simon's slanders, and the monstrous shapes he had taken, and all the diseases he had sent after the sacrificial feast. And some of the sick persons were still there in Tyre, while others had gone on with Simon to Sidon just as I arrived. hoping to be cured by him, but that I had heard that none of them had been cured by him. I also told Peter of the controversy I had with Appion, and he, from his love to me and desiring to encourage me, praised and blessed me. Then, having supped, he betook himself to the rest of the fatigues of his journey and rendered so necessary. So that's the end of Book 6, and next time we'll be picking it up in Book 7. Thank you for listening. Shalom.